welcome everybody to the SNIA Experts on Data podcast. My name is Eric Wright. I'm the Chief Content Officer at GTM Delta and host of the SNIA Experts on Data podcast. I'm extremely excited and honored to be welcoming Mounir to the stage with me today. We're going to talk about a lot of very interesting stuff around data protection, data management, the world of ransomware and wildness that's going on. We've got a lot of changes in how we've seen the patterns of exploitation and risk, and ultimately then technology's way of, bringing forward stuff that we'd already had in the past and sort of revisiting it, and also fundamentally new application patterns. So, Mounir, if you don't mind, give a quick introduction of yourself and
Sure.
you get started with SNIA as well. It'd be a great place to open things up.
All right. So my name is Mounir Elmously. I am currently holding the position of a senior manager in Ernst Young, and I have a very great passion of storage. I've always had that. Everywhere I went in my career, it was storage related. I've been working with almost all the high-end vendors that do storage, and the good part of my life is when I joined EY, I started to learn the business side and the value of storage in business and the critical nature of business. And I'm very happy to be hosted by Eric, and I'll be glad to participate in this event.
Yeah, and that's you brought such a perfect starting point. This idea that we always say that it's not about the speeds and feeds. Now it is, but it also is about taking those technical capabilities and matching them to requirements that are going to drive business outcomes. And it's really an interesting community inside SNIA that we've got such a great merger of really fantastic expert technologists and also, yourself, who splits the line between having experts in technology, but understanding how to map it against business value and kind of where the industry is going. So with that, looking at data protection and, sort of what we call the modern workloads, what are you seeing today, Mounir? And then maybe even we'll go into the Wayback Machine and talk about how we got here.
All right. So from my perspective, what I've seen in the industry recently is the pointer has changed from the actual traditional operational recovery to ransomware. Everybody has a ransomware on their mind. Every CIO is having a portion of his mind dedicated to ransomware now. Now, interestingly enough, over the past 3 weeks, I've got 5 projects that are related to ransomware. I never had that many projects in the same time. I used to have one now and then, but having 5 together in all industries, healthcare, financial sector, commercial, manufacturing, it's on the top of the mind of the CIO, the ransomware. Some of them, a couple of years ago, I remember, I spent a lot of time trying to educate my customer or help him make a decision that ransomware is becoming a real concern that they need to consider. And we kept going back and forth, back and forth. And one day I was on a call with him and he said, "Excuse me, there's something urgent in the data center and I need to respond to that. I'll come to you in 15 minutes. He came back in 15 minutes, say, "We are hit with the ransomware."
Oh, wow.
Which was too late already.
Yeah, that's the tough part. It's like I'm an older gentleman, so I remember when the check engine light used to just be the check engine light would go on and then the engine would practically explode about 30 seconds later. We've gotten better with diagnostics since then, but ransomware is effectively, by the time you see it, it's too late.
It's too late. Exactly. And many CIOs and data center managers actually still have the perception that they're good until, it's too late, as you said. We have a good backup, but they don't know that the first step for a bad actor when he sneaks into your network is to make sure that your backup is useless. So you have no way of coming back.
Yeah, this is the new target, and an absolutely optimized target, really, to think about this. If you want to do damage to a business or apply a ransom and sort of have the greatest hold on them, removing their capability to recover it's pretty amazing to me that the very same companies that are trying to protect the workload themselves are now at risk. And it's an interesting time as a vendor, because now you're not only having to deliver ransomware protection for your clients, but then a lot of them have SaaS services. There's other adjacent connections to other cloud and multi-cloud, SaaS control planes. And those are now subject to risk. And, we saw very recently to call it a situation, I don't mean to pick on a vendor, but people will obviously know about Microsoft and the CrowdStrike updates that triggered an issue where all of a sudden people who were using a protection platform, it suffered a human error that led to a significant impact for clients. And now they may have thought the thing I'm using for protection is my protection, not realizing they needed to also protect it. Such an interesting problem to see in reality.
Exactly. Although it was not a ransomware or a virus, but it was a mistake from an operator or an engineer.
Just a good old-fashioned, as they say, a fat finger configuration change, right? But that same effect, you look at if this was ransomware and there was no recovery mechanism, like
God help them.
It's absolutely terrifying.
Yeah, there are actually, I've seen many organizations go out of business because of ransomware. They shut down the doors and go out of business completely. Some of them are, they have the depth and the budget to recover with some problems, but I've seen some startups that they shut down the business.
Yeah, and the pattern, I'll say, are like the persona and profile of companies that are subject to this risk. We used to think it's only going to be large enterprise companies that have vast amounts of data or something of value to sell, but ransomware is now an SMB problem. Like, it's actually moved much more down market. Ransomware has apparently got better go-to-market strategy than any other product in the world, because they are actually successfully moving into other areas.
Actually, I have an interesting story that I was working with a data center manager in one of the companies. She's a lady, and she says, my son was hit by a ransomware where they blocked his Facebook, and they're asking for $170 to recover it. So on all levels, everybody is subject to attacks.
So when we look at the enterprise protection sort of mitigation strategies, we saw a lot around early work with, obviously replication. Some people are using, asynchronous or even as close to synchronous mirroring as possible. We see the sort of 3-2-1 backups for offsites and alternate sites. Not adding immutability yet. Looking at those three, protection styles, what do you see as still valid, Mounir, and what do you see as needing update?
Well, the idea here is the operational recovery will always be there, whether it's today or tomorrow or for the foreseen future. You still need operational recovery for a day-to-day operation. A person, fat fingers, deletes a file, a disk failure that was not mirrored, a replication error that results into data system corruption. All this, at the end of the day, might require you to invoke a recovery from a local backup. So this is not going away, at least for now. It's only the pendulum is shifting, that in addition to this, another avenue is coming, which is the recovery from a bad actor or a malware person. I remember when I started my career, there was a healthcare company that keeps the cancer genome records. They keep it for years for research. And they had a disgruntled, but that was long before inventing the ransomware.
Yeah.
and they let a person go, and he was the backup operator. And before he leaves, he made sure to delete everything they have, records that are kept for 20, 30, 40 years. That this company went out of business. Simple as that.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So human factor is still there. It's not gonna go away. It's only getting more complicated. So replication, sync or async, and 3-2-1 rule still valid, but it needs to be slightly updated. That's the point line.
Yeah. And interestingly, I was using mirroring products back in like software mirroring from between two sites. I had a location in Toronto, a location in Vancouver. So heavy geo protection and near zero replication. And it was an interesting problem that somebody on the source side, of course, went and they just accidentally, they thought they were moving a folder, but they actually deleted it. And then my IT manager at the time says, "Hey, okay, no problem. Let's just go to the secondary site and recover the files." I'm like, no. We're mirroring the changes. We mirrored the deletion the moment it happened. Like that the way and the deployment was not designed to protect that type of recovery. It was to protect losing access and having to recover from the secondary site, not proactively deleting files, which were then proactively deleted from the targets.
Exactly.
It was a hard lesson in, and same with viruses. If we had a virus, then we would just be asynchronously replicating the virus. It's very efficient.
If your cadence of replication, of asynchronous replication, is delayed for quite some time, you might have a chance. But it might be too late. Now, the good news is, if you look at some vendors who do, especially with the NAS replication, is they do journaling and replicate the journal.
Right.
And they keep the journal for any time they like 1 day, 2 day, 1 week, whatever they like. They might end up, if it was invoked by ransomware, they might be able to go back in history on those mirrors or journals and get the latest good update, maybe 1 day ago or something, depending when they realized that they were impacted by something.
Yeah, and I think it was an interesting shift in that we could replicate immediately, but then retain like 3 sort of local changes in the journal on the other side. I get like that pattern began to emerge, but not even by design. We figured it out in practice, which is what's interesting now with ransomware, because the way in which it spreads, it's not land and spread. Like it's generally land, lay in wait, then spread.
That's the Trojan horse.
Yeah.
That's why they call it Trojan. Now, if you remember, the first ransomware that the industry knew about was Sony. They realized that they had the ransomware virus in their systems 9 months before the invocation.
Wow.
So every backup, they could not reach, at that time they were not mature to manipulate the backups. But every backup, because nobody has a retention of that long, every backup was infected. So every time they try to recover, they get reinfected.
Incredible. Yeah, and that was, like you said, even ransomware was such an odd word at the time, and people, we just thought you have to be as big as Sony. We hear about stuff like Sandworm and sort of the large botnet type of attacks, but they always seemed like someone else's problem, because the scale of the target seems to be something that we perceived has to be huge. But
exactly.
You mentioned a few great examples, Mounir, before of like, this is not a giant enterprise problem anymore. This is an everybody problem.
Correct. Probably the small and mid organizations are less prepared, hoping that they go under the radar. But everybody has money is in the radar, regardless of your industry. If I can squeeze $10 from you, I'll do it. That's how it works.
Now, we've had a lot of consolidation in the industry, which is a natural wave. We saw some new developments around specific like ransomware platforms and products that came into the market. Some people that targeted different types of backup protection, so like containerized workloads or serverless. And then what is often typical is those companies reasonably do well. They do commercially okay, but then a larger company will come along and pick them up and say, "Hey, let's add you to the portfolio." So we've seen a lot of that. But I'm curious on your thoughts in the industry approach to that, Mounir. How successful are you seeing some of those acquisitions, and how ready are these large incumbent traditional backup vendors for these new types of attacks and protections?
Well, let's stay within the context of the data protection and not the actual integration of the industry or the business. Right. So they normally, before they start the acquisition process, they actually evaluate the current capability of the acquired organization. So in many situations, days after the acquisition, the effective acquisition, everybody lives in his own world for a month, for 3 months, 6 months, until they merge. Now, during that time, the small company that has been acquired is still using its own day-to-day operation and day-to-day production until the governance and regulations coming from the mothership gets introduced and set on them. Now, as I told you before, the small organizations generally are little less prepared from ransomware. This is actually because of either lack of human resources to support a new avenue of data protection, or lack of funds, or both. Small organizations don't have deep pockets of large organizations. And actually the industry makes a major difference. So financial services industry are the fastest in this avenue. The merger and the evolution of integration of the data protection happens in a very fast fashion. Healthcare organizations, manufacturing organizations, they normally take much longer time. I've seen companies running with 2 or 3 backup software solutions for a couple of years. I'm working with one of them now. They decided to keep every backup software running at its own location until they have a TSA, technology exit plan,
right?
Maybe a year or something. This is the time they will shut down one of the backup operations to standardize across the operation.
Yeah, it's an interesting implementation pattern. So like storage and data protection both have this interesting problem. There's a lot of legacy in what they do, and there's a lot of history that gets implemented as part of it. When I remember being in a data center operations, and when we would bring a new storage vendor in to have a discussion, it was generally seen as like, okay, we're going to commercially talk with you guys. Once we confirm that we're going to basically buy a whole set of racks, port all of our data over, get rid of the old gear. And it was very much a rip and replace, and we wanted to shorten the time frame implemented because they were large SANs. That was a bit of a deployment pattern. But then all of a sudden, over the course of the next decade, we had many bezels in the storage. You didn't have to get rid of your vendor 1 in order to acquire vendor 2. You just started to do purpose-built storage, or you would share it on virtualization. So there was less dependence on having one single interface back to your storage. Now, when it comes to the data protection side, what are the reasons why it is hard to get rid of your existing backup product?
The main reason is, in many cases, backups are considered company archive, and they might need it for a very long time. Like, for example, pharmaceuticals and healthcare, they keep some of the data for 20, 30, 40 years. I've worked with a pharmaceutical company that had a backup from a vendor, and they switched, and they have 370,000 tapes to migrate from the backup vendor A to backup vendor B, which is a mountain of data and years of operation.
Right.
So the normal average life expectancy of a backup software in an organization is like 15 years, give or take, maybe 10, maybe 20. But what I've seen in general, 15 years is the life of a backup software. During that backup software, if the organization, and remember, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, there was no concept of a separate archive solution. So the
Right.
only thing they had was a backup. And they keep the backups for 20, 30, 40 years. Maybe they will never use it, but sometimes in a regulation, they come and inspect you and they say, okay, show me the data of this product at this time.
Right.
And if you fail, you are getting a fine. So that was prior to the invention of the concept of a separate archive. Backup had a very long life expectancy. Now, with the introduction of new backups and the separation between backup and archive, it's much easier to switch backups. Not every 15 years, you can do it in every 2 years, 3 years, if you needed to, because your retention is normally a month or two, not anything more than that. So that, shutting down. Now, by the time you recycle the backup media, 2 months would have gone, and all your new backups are coming on the new product.
Yeah. So with changes in that pattern, Mounir, what are we seeing around now? I'll say the new paradigm. I hate to say that word. I sound like an analyst. We're reusing or making use of archives and backup images in order to do new things, like maybe train LLMs or reuse the data for financial reporting or shipping archives and then loading some into Redshifts and Databricks we're using data post protection differently than before. It was just like we back it up and we need to be able to restore it.
Okay.
Now I'm seeing more people trying to make use of those, whether it's object stores or structured and unstructured data. What are you seeing as this now backup and archive becoming production data?
Well, as you said before, there is a plethora of data in the archive platform. So depending on your industry and depending on your need to keep data, you might have 7 years, 10 years, 15 years of industry data that you can help normalize and get actual statistics and analysis passed to an AI for making decision. You cannot rely on that on a backup beyond 1 month. So if your data retention extends beyond 1 month, normally, now I will give you another example. If you think of how frequently do you need to access backup from an older backup, like a month ago. Now, most of the normal recovery happens within the first week of the backup. 99% of the recovery happens from that week. Now, the 1% might happen beyond that, but beyond a month, every customer I spoke to, they said, if it's a backup, I don't think I will ever need it. If it's a data retention, governance, regulation requirement, then look into the archive. Don't come to the backup. Because now that actually improved the backup efficiency a lot, because now you don't need to keep a long history of backups that you never use. So your backup storage got more efficient, and you can put the rest on an object storage, as you said, or S3 or Blob, whatever technology you use, and you can keep extending those. And this is pay as you go, actually. So it becomes very cost efficient as well. So the idea here is for an AI implementation, data analytics, you need to look into the history of the company In addition to governance and regulations, I think you should go to the archive. For operational recovery, ransomware recovery, the first month is all you need. That's the way I've seen it in the industry.
So in seeing that now, so Mounir, as if somebody were to come to you, they're a CIO, they're evaluating new platforms, and they have to weigh a new platform that's tackling the problem in a what we believe to be a novel way. So there's some new vendor comes along and they've got what looks like a novel approach, but they generally won't attack the traditional backup problem. But then at the same time, the incumbency, of the traditional vendor may not have the skills or technical capabilities yet for this new novel approach. What do you see as the challenge for both incumbents and newcomers to the market?
I like that question a lot, actually. So what I've seen in the industry is the incumbent that have been the leaders for the past 2 decades are now left in the dust. They took a very long time to adapt to the changes in the industry. I stay away from the vendor's name, but they become a niche players in my customer platform. The newcomers, regardless of the name, again, they have a much better vision that has the right approach to protect from the new malware, ransomware, in addition to keeping your backups in the operational way the same way. So both of them come together. The new vendors have that in a very nice way. Now, I'll give you another very funny example. I'm working with a backup vendor that's a very small startup backup vendor that's specialized in cloud. And under the hood, when I spoke to the vendor, they said, we are taking the backup product from the leader and putting some covering around it and some services around it because it has been proven for years, 20 years, 30 years. That's very stable, very robust. You can depend on it until the ransomware came. So we complement the gap of the ransomware, but use the right development and investment that vendor has put in the platform.
Yeah, there is, and in that, I guess there's probably a lot of IP that's been there for a long time, but hasn't necessarily been necessary. Do you see this as an opportunity that some of those incumbents and the large vendors, like they should be reinvesting in R&D? What do you see as kind of the opportunity in the coming couple of years for those larger traditional vendors?
All right. So the major 2 backup vendor that I've seen in the industry, they actually contributed to 70% 10 years ago of the market. They were left in the dark for a couple of years. The last time I met with them, they said, this is our new platform, this is our new design, and this is how we deal with the winds of change coming to the industry. So they keep reinventing because remember, backups are the most stickiest product in your data centers. You would keep it for a very long time. So because they have the benefit of being in the customer, they understand the business, there is a natural love between the customer and the vendor. However, the customer thinks there is a gap. So they're trying to fill in this gap to stay in place. Some of them lost. I remember one of the leaders today, before they acquire a company that specializes in ransomware, I was working with a financial institution and they had that vendor. And the CIO told me, I'm dumping that backup solution vendor because they missed the train for the ransomware. And they dumped him and they got a new player. But like in a couple of months later, that leader, and he's still leader by the way, acquired a ransomware company, cloud ransomware company, and their name started to shine again.
Yeah.
and in a very good way. And actually, in a couple of projects that I worked with, I highly recommended them to the client.
So I think it does look like a great opportunity ahead, but if you're an incumbent, they need to be acutely aware of the risk to the business. There's no more guarantee that, hey, we already own their backups. It's not like they can get rid of us. That is not the case anymore, right?
No. If you think this way, you're doomed. Because the CIO and his team is always out looking for something new.
Yeah, and it's interesting that even in looking at my career early on, we were the sunk cost fallacy was incredibly strong, and now the ability for people to shift and change, platforms, vendors, clouds, you just don't have that anchor anymore that they used to be able to say, like, well, they have no choice. Like, they're running in our cloud, they're running in our backup products, they're running on our storage. They have to stick with us. It's like, no, they don't.
That's too late now. If you think this way, you're not going to last in the industry.
What's the reality of zero downtime, zero data loss? When you hear phrases like that, Mounir, what does it say to you? We've been in the industry, and I know I'm a marketer and a technologist, and I'm always torn by what I say and what I know I can do.
Now, let's agree on something. The infrastructure, the hardware, the software are components, are vehicles to deliver the service. The responsible party of the IT is required to provide an undisrupted operation to the data and to the services. But internally, failures will always happen. It's not when, it is, it will. Not if, but it will. It will happen. You will have a disk failure. You will have the data corruption. You will have a lost connection that results in data loss. You will have an inconsistent database. The list goes on and on and on and on. The idea here is you build enough recoverability and resiliency that if this happens, and it happens, your service continues to deliver and meet the customer expectation. But zero downtime is maybe in heavens it happened, but it's not going to happen in our age.
Well, and time and time again, I've always been amazed, no matter how many times I ran operations for a couple of large companies, and I still had to explain, like almost on a monthly basis, Mounir, the difference between resiliency and recoverability, between RTO and RPO. It was like, we live the life, so we think about those criteria very distinctly, because our jobs and our MBOs are built around uptime, protection, etc. But it was so wild that when you're not thinking about that full time, some people can very easily confuse resilient infrastructure with recoverable infrastructure. How often are you seeing that problem of sort of the words being confused and confusion in general in practitioners?
I see this every day with my tears. I always cry when I see this. The vendors are responsible for this. They always mislead the customers of that resiliency is redundancy or recovery. The fact they are not. But they misuse the names, misuse the definitions, and they say we educate the industry, so we say what we say. But the fact is, they are completely are not the same. Resilience means non-disruptive operation, no matter what happens. The IT or the service delivery continues. Recovery or redundancy means you might encounter anything more than zero downtime and anything more than zero data loss. Depending on how bulletproof your design is, you might have a much shorter loss of service or loss of data. This becomes a redundancy resiliency solution. But if you, I'll give you, for example, a simple design of dual storage controllers, dual disks, doing mirroring. You might lose one disk at any time or lose one controller at any time, but customer access to read and write will not be impacted.
Right.
So this is resilience. But if you switch platforms from product A to product B, and because of a failure, there is a time to restore services on the other side of the house. Like if you have a cluster. Now, the good cluster design, there is a heartbeat that keeps monitoring each other and makes the failover. And they lose probably, I've seen it, losing maybe a half a ping, which is not a major problem to customers, except for the financial industry and trading floors. But in other situations, healthcare and other industries, half a ping is not a major problem. So they can think of themselves as resilient. But when you talk about recovery, this means they lost and somebody has to invoke the failover that takes maybe an hour, 2 hours, depending on your industry and your business needs and how much you invest, by the way.
Yeah, and I guess this is a reminder to folks that is know how to protect it, but also know how to recover it. And, we as, practitioners in that company have to match that to the business requirements, because what we believe is like, hey, this application needs to be up and running every day. You're like, well, in the case of disaster, we may find that it actually has our RPO of 5 days. That's not really rapidly updated. RTO 48 hours. We can get by with other processes for that one. So it's not just the nature of data, but the nature of the applications and processes that use that data. So given your experience, Mounir, I'd love to close on this. What would you suggest to a person that's coming into an organization and they've been charged with protection and resiliency and backup? What are the things that they should do as a person to be as ready as possible for that situation?
The first thing I would think is that he needs to understand the risks he is subject to. So risk impact analysis is required as a first step. So he doesn't need to plan for an earthquake in a stable geography. He doesn't require to plan for a flood in a center of the continent. There's no flood there, right? So he's not subject to such risk. But first thing, he needs to know what risks he's dealing with. Second, now I've seen in the industry, across all industries, there are some limited number of applications or business processes that are critical to the business. And this is in this situation, for financial sector, it's between 15 and 20. For healthcare, it's like 15. And for manufacturers, like 10. 10% of their business applications require very resilient recovery capability. So for such percentage, you need to make sure that you understand exactly what is your option for extended downtime, what's the appetite of the end users for downtime and accepting that versus cost. Because every time you improve your recovery capability, this comes with a cost.
Right.
So the first minute you talk to, let's say, a business X is running SAP application, and you tell him, what's your appetite for downtime and data loss? He will definitely, even if he's using an application, he plays games.
Yeah.
He says, I don't have an appetite for downtime. It's zero. I don't accept anything more than zero downtime, zero data loss.
Right.
Then we tell him, okay, I can do that for you for $5 million. And the fact is the application is $20,000, for example. Then he will go back and think again to select the right acceptable level of resiliency, redundancy in his environments. So tiering the application between different tiers that can be treated differently and protected differently is the next step. In my point of view, any application that has recovery point objective and recovery time objective of 24 hours or more, it is not a good idea to replicate those and put them in a mission critical.
Right.
Because you have a good backup that's 24 hours ago. You can use that. But for applications like trading, like financial transactions, you cannot tolerate downtime. So this one might put you in 1 hour RTO, RPO, or whatever numbers your business is willing to have. And every time you make this shorter, you make sure you have deep pocket to support that.
That's right. It's an equilibrium, but as you say, Mounir, it's the connecting of, what can we do, what do we need to do, and what is the cost to do it. That's such a fantastic sort of 3-part question to go through as we look at business requirements. I could do this all day. I really wish we had an hour or two to. I've got so much we could chat on, and this has been really helpful, Mounir. For folks
to participate.
For folks that want to connect with you, what's the best way they can reach you to chat more?
I think it starts with SNEA. I'm on SNEA members, and if you happen to be in Ernst Young or have an Ernst Young relationship or a customer of Ernst Young, we have an internal communication network you can reach me in. But outside Ernst Young, I think the best way to come is through SNEA.
It's such a fantastic way to meet great people like yourself. Mounir, thank you very much. It was a pleasure to chat. And for folks that do want to find out more, definitely get involved with SNEA. If you're not already, you can connect with amazing folks like Mounir and other folks from his team who participate. And just it's such a fantastic community. And of course, we've got developer events that are coming up. We're moving to quarterly regional events. There's all sorts of new things that are coming. So it's great chances to meet both online and in person. And I thank you very much for the conversation, Mounir. It was a real pleasure and a great reminder of what we need to think about. It's not just about pressing back up. There's a lot more involved. And thank you for sharing your insights.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure.